This sitting is resumed. Speakers, Senator Dr. Monroe-Light.
Mr. President, I want to take this opportunity to thank all of those who rose to speak on this bill. The robust discussion that we've had in here really shows the importance of the bill and the number of areas that were identified and brought to the fore. Mr. President, I believe added to the discussion fully and allowed us to look at all of the nuances. I want to address the concern that was raised in relation to a regional approach, Mr. President, and to remind that here in Barbados, we have the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, SEDEMA, and SEDEMA effectively coordinates on the behalf of CARICOM a regional approach to disaster management. More than that, just quite recently, this government, in collaboration with an international partner, established right here in Barbados a hub so that Barbados becomes the hub for responding to regional catastrophes. And it is not only to serve as a hub for responses, but also as well to provide training and capacity building as well. So the government fully appreciates that we need to be able to work with our regional partners in order to address the issue. Barbados by itself, 166 square miles. We understand that we are small and that we are vulnerable, and that we have to be able to call on and work with our partners. Don't forget, we have the potential in the context of a catastrophe for refugees from any, and I say call them refugees, but from people who have to flee their country to come to ours, or for us to be able to have to flee our country to go to theirs. So if we approach this in a way that doesn't embrace our regional neighbors, then it means that we are creating a system that is not sustainable for us. And so very much this government is understanding of that and is ensuring that we work jointly in order to have the approach that is necessary. I want, Mr. Speaker, as well to address the concern that was placed on the floor in relation to the NIS Section 8 of the Act, where it was noted that that there's supposed to be monthly reports on the catastrophe fund, and the concern that was raised in respect of the management of the fund. I do want to invite all of the honourable senators here to go on the NIS website. If you just go with NIS and type in catastrophe fund, you will see in there, Mr. President, the catastrophe fund financial report as at 2021-10/31, the catastrophe fund financial report as at 2021-9/30, catastrophe fund financial report as at 21-08/31, catastrophe fund financial report as at 2021-7/31, and I can go on. I can go on, Mr. President. So that I also want to make the point, and while it is appreciated that yes, that is up to 2021, as of October, I want to remind this honourable chamber that even though that yes, the NIS audited statements are not up to date, the actual reports on all of the NIS funds every 3 years, and in that actuarial report, there has never been an adverse report on the catastrophe fund to date. I also, Mr. President, want to indicate that currently the catastrophe fund stands at $30.5 million within the catastrophe fund at present. The fund is not in danger. The discussion over the National Insurance Fund and the extent to which it could possibly run out in 12 years or more. Let us be fair and let's have an honest discussion. The NIS fund is not in danger of collapse. We came to this country, again, I'm going to use my own words, in an effort to be proactive. We intended as a government to face it and fix it. We did not hide the fact that the audited reports were not up to date. We came to the country and said there is a problem, and these are the things that we are working to do to fix it. We have said to the country that we are working to bring up all of those audited reports, and we are working with the auditors currently to ensure that those reports are up to date. This government is intended on facing it and fixing it. We came to the country for the conversation. I also want to suggest that the issue of corporate governance is one that this government is committed to and transparent and being very, very transparent about. Currently, right through the public sector, there is training for every single SOE board on the issue of corporate governance and how we strengthen it and ensure that it operates to best practices. That is who this government is. If we want perfection in this moment, then I am going to hold my hands up and say to you, I cannot deliver perfection. I would suggest, quite humbly, if I could, I probably don't belong here, I probably belong up in the heavens. Perfection is something that you work towards. And I would also like to suggest, again, let's be fair, that the issue of corporate governance is not just a problem or a challenge for government. The statutory collapse was a problem of corporate governance. It was a problem of corporate governance. So that the issues of management of corporate governance are one that we are intending to work through. We understand the issues, many of them, we've found, but we have not hidden them, Mr. President. We have not hidden it. And we are working assiduously to be able to correct it. And again, I want to identify that the NAS fund is not in danger. The NAS fund is sorry, Mr. President, I'm just looking to just make sure that I can give the correct figures. The fund is currently at 3.9 billion strong, or 5 times the value of the current benefit payments. It is not in jeopardy. There has never been an adverse report on the catastrophe fund. Go on the NAS website and you will find the reports of the catastrophe fund that is there. So I hope, Mr. President, I've spoken to that particular issue. I also want, as well, Mr. President, to address the issue that was raised in the context of how the fund is capacitated. And I want to point to the legislation and as well go to Section 3 of the Catastrophe Fund, Mr. President, and I will read from the Act itself. It says, the Catastrophe Fund established under the former Act shall, on the repeal of the former Act, continue in existence under this Act and continue to consist of A, annual contributions with effect from financial year 2006-2007 in the sum of 2.5 million voted by Parliament for the purposes of the fund for a period of not less than 5 years. B, monthly contributions payable with effect from financial year 2006-2007 by every employed person and self-employed person in the amount of 0.1% of the earnings on which that person pays national insurance. And C, amounts realized from investment proceeds, and D, monies that may accrue from the operations of the fund. So, Mr. President, again, just to indicate that the Act does, in fact, identify right there how the fund is capacitated. And as I've indicated, the fund is well financed. There are monies in the fund at current, so that the extent to which there are concerns in relation to whether or not we will have enough money in the fund, those can be allayed with the facts that I have given, Mr. President. I also want to speak to the notion of effectiveness and efficiencies, in the context of the National Housing Corporation, the UDC, etc., and the extent that there are inefficiencies within these agencies, then they're not fit for purpose to be included in the context of the legislation. And again, Mr. President, I go back to the fact, if we want perfection now, then I will say to you, I can't deliver. I can't give you perfection in this moment. It is a work in progress. Mr. President, what is it that we are to do? There is a catastrophe. There are agencies that people are going to. Do we say to them, sorry, I can't help you because we have an inefficiency here? Or do we, at the same time that we try to address the inefficiencies, make sure as well that we are able to provide the services that people are asking? Do we stop in the face of when it is imperfect, Mr. President? Because if we did, every other process that we would be doing, we would stop. To suggest that because an agency has a concern or a challenge, that means that it is not proper, that it cannot act, that it cannot work to fulfill its mandate, I would suggest is a very spurious argument, Mr. President, and is an unfortunate argument as well. Because I said there is no organization or agency, as far as I am aware, and like Senator King, I will ask, show me the evidence of the perfection. We all work in a space in which everything is not perfect, but that we need to be able to maneuver and still deliver to the people of Barbados. So we take away these three agencies because there are challenges, and then what? What do we say to the people of Barbados? Where do they come to, Mr. President, when they are seeking housing solutions? We turn them away? Is that the solution? Furthermore, I want to identify that in the context of the amendment broadened that same amendment that we're looking at to make sure that even if it is not UDC, RDC, or the National Housing Corporation, that it says any other government department, any other statutory body that is able and fit for purpose to deliver, that they can also as well deliver. The focus here, Mr. President, is on the fact that we need to deliver for the people of Barbados. Mr. President, I want to step back a little bit too as well, and just bear with me, because a comment was made on the floor in the respect of the seriousness of the government side in this debate, because numbers were perhaps few on that side. The government brought this legislation. The government brought this legislation. Cabinet sat down, considered it, mulled over it, looked at it. We could have left it in comfort. We didn't. We didn't. We brought it here again to face it and fix it principle that this government operates under. We are not, Mr. President, comforted to just rest on our laurels and leave legislation there because it should be there or because we feel it is too soon to be amended, particularly when it has to do with delivering for the people of Barbados. No way. And to suggest that there's not a seriousness in our side because some members, for legitimate reasons, could not be here at the time, again, I find is unfortunate. It is an unfortunate, Mr. President, indictment on this side and how we attend to the matters before us. There has never been a time when we have ever in any of our actions demonstrated that we are not serious about attending to the bills that our government is bringing before this House. And I want to make that perfectly clear, Mr. President. I also, Mr. President, want to indicate, and I think we've come to a fair agreement of understanding that they are indeed building codes, building standards. We also understand that these are not mandatory, and this again is a work in progress that we have to be able to move forward with in order, and I agree, to ensure that we build resilience on all fronts as we go forward. Finally, Mr. President, there were some questions raised in the context of the Roof to Reefs project and the extent to which that Roof to Reefs project is ongoing. I will say briefly, Mr. President, that the director of the Roof to Reefs project sits in the Prime Minister's office, moved from another department to sit in the Prime Minister's office, and that move demonstrates again the importance that the government is placing on that project, the director. I also want to advise, Mr. President, that within the next month or so, we will be recruiting staff, an additional 5 persons, under a project for the Global Environmental Facility, the GCF, in order to be able to fund those so that those don't come out of the government pockets, because that is also something that we have to look at. So yes, we want to be able to provide the service, but it doesn't all have to come from government coffers. And so the Roof to Roof project was designed that it is supported not just by government, but by other partners as well. And if we understood the design of the Roof to Roof project, we will then be able to appreciate it is not only what that particular project is going to deliver, but all of the interlinkages that are happening across ministries, whether they're in water, what we are doing in housing, what we are doing with waste, and all of those areas. And there are several projects on the ground now that are being delivered in the context of the Roof to Roofs project, Mr. President. Mr. President, I beg to move that, Your Honor. Yeah? Oh. Okay. Yeah, I beg to move, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill, the Catastrophe Fund Amendment Bill 2022, be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. We think it's the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honour do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of the bill.
The question is that I do not leave the chair and the Honourable Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Senate is in committee.
Clause 1.
Chair, I do now beg that Clause 1 stand part.
The question is that Clause 1 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Mr. Chair, I do now beg that Clause 2 stand part.
The question is that Clause 2 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Honourable senators against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Mr. Chair, I do now beg that Clause 3 stand part.
The question is that Clause 3 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 4.
Mr. Chair, I beg that Clause 4 stand part.
The question is that Clause 4 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Report.
Which is? Mr. Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do not report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye. Honourable Senators against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee.
Sorry. Yeah, Mr. President, I beg to move that the bill now be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Catastrophe Fund Amendment Bill 2022. Sorry, Amendment Act 2022.
The question is that this bill be now passed and so cited. Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now so passed and cited.
Order number 4, sir. In the name of the Honourable Acting Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to approve in accordance with Section 5 of the Crown Lands Vesting and Disposal Act, Chapter 225, the vesting in Barbados Tourism Investment, Inc. of a parcel of land, the property of the state, together with the building thereon known as the Treasury Building, situate at Bridge Street in the parish of St. Michael in this island for the purpose of residential development.
Senator Dr. Monroe Knight.
Mr. President, the resolution before this Honourable House is for the vesting of the property comprising the former Treasury Building, standing at 2,106.5 square meters of state land, situated in historic Bridgetown, in the Barbados Tourism Investment, Inc. Mr. President, this resolution is part of government's wider Bridgetown regeneration project, and the aim is to repurpose the old Treasury Building for first-time owners in the middle income bracket. Mr. President, I think that most of us in here can relate to the sentiment associated with Bridgetown. And again, you know, growing up, hearing stories of the first time you went to Bridgetown and, you know, people dressing up, you know, you're going to Bridgetown for the first time. So there is a sentiment that you grow up with in the context of the city center and Bridgetown. And not only in the context of the city center itself, but even the Treasury Building, yeah? So that the Treasury Building was opened on November 22nd, 1967, by the late, the former Prime Minister, Errol Barrow. And I also remember as well that every time you go into town, the Treasury Building was always a good spot to say, meet me by the Treasury Building. You know, or you see the Treasury Building and then you turn left or you turn right. So it was a focal point in the context of the Bridgetown area. I also, as well, Mr. President, when we talk about the whole notion of the city center and the Bridgetown area, one of the other phenomena that we saw was also the rural to urban move, right? The rural to urban drift. So as Bridgetown expanded, people moving from rural areas to come to the center of what was perceived economic activity, and therefore as well economic opportunity as well. So that the city center stands in a particular historical view. In the context of culture, we would say it is part of our intangible cultural heritage. Yeah? How we hold and how we view Bridgetown and the things that and the memories that we hold in the context of the city center. At the same time, we recognize that over the years, the fortunes of the city center has ebbed and flowed. You know, we can see a time or remember a time when Bridgetown was flourishing, and we can also recall a time, and some would say no, when, you know, it doesn't seem to be as vibrant, as flourishing as it could possibly be. We've had, again, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the natural fortunes of the economic vicissitudes that have caused some businesses to close. And therefore, in many respects, we need to be able to take an active approach in order to the city center. Do we let it die? Do we let it run on its own? Or as a small country, again, understanding the historical and innate value of Bridgetown, do we then make a concerted effort to ensure that we can rejuvenate the Bridgetown area? The Harvard Gazette, in an article, "What Makes Cities Thrive," was headlined by the phrase, "More people and lots of them." More people and lots of them. The article indicated that the strengthening of city centers had to be buttressed by creating environments and spaces for people to gather. That it was no longer the traditional notion of a city center that was just about shopping, but that the creation of thriving city centers had to do with being able to create opportunities for people to undertake various types of activities, entertainment, cultural activities, have your restaurants, living spaces, etc. If we think about the city centers that we visit and that we know of and that we view on television, these are bustling places. But people are not just doing one thing. Yeah? People are not just doing one thing. If we think about Manhattan, which may be one of the ones that we're more familiar with, when we go to Manhattan, it's bustling for shopping. But I remember going to Manhattan, and sometimes there are shows that are shown on the screen, and people standing up in the middle of the city and watching it, or there are performances. The tourists are taking pictures because they're iconic places all over. People go to Paris, not only just for the shopping, but what did they go to Paris for? The Eiffel Tower. To go to museums, so that the notion of the city center is changing itself. And again, as a country that is forward-looking, this government is seeking to invest in making sure that we build out a city center again, yes, for tourism activity, but also as well to make sure that we have a cultural hub, one, but also as well a space that people can feel safe to be able to live and experience a multiplicity of activities and things, and for this city center, once again, to be able to thrive. I also want to say, and because one of my portfolios is as Minister of the Prime Minister's Office's responsibility for culture, to also remind that Bridgetown has the designation. It is historic Bridgetown and its garrison, inscribed by UNESCO, by the UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2021. So that there is value and there is recognition of the value that is inherent in the context of Bridgetown. And Mr. President, I want to go through just a look and help us understand what that inscription means in terms of the value of historic Bridgetown. The process of gaining inscription on the World Heritage List is a long and complicated one. The inscription depends on the country being able to satisfy at least one of 10 criteria set up by UNESCO's operational guidelines. Among other things, for example, a site must represent a masterpiece of human creative genius, exhibit an important interchange of human values over a span of time or within a cultural era of the world, on developments in architecture or technology, monumental arts, town planning, or landscape design, bear a unique or at least exceptional testimony to a cultural tradition or civilization which is living or has disappeared, and contain superlative natural phenomena or areas of exceptional natural beauty and aesthetic importance. So that UNESCO has recognized the value that we have in the context of this World Heritage Site. And not only then do we have that inscription, but the Division of Culture has been working in many ways to make sure that it continues to enhance the value and the appearance of Bridgetown in order, again, to make sure that it contributes to the rejuvenation of Bridgetown. So that in terms of public education and interpretation, we have developed under the World Heritage Committee, again, which is an interministerial committee, signage has been erected. There are now 13 entrance signs along the boundary site, and approximately 200 directional signs have been installed at streets and alleys within the capital city. And there's an ongoing process to erect even more interpretive sites in order to be able to identify the historic spaces that we have in Bridgetown. I remember earlier this year going to a ceremony in which the Division of Culture was highlighting entrepreneurs who were doing work in the city center to create tourist attractions, tours. I did not even know, Mr. President, there are cannons in Swan Street, right around Bridgetown. And so these entrepreneurs were developing tours to be able to move tourists about Bridgetown in order to look at these heritage sites. And I was saying to myself, as Barbadians, we don't even know them. So that the potential is there in the context of our city center of Bridgetown to be able to rebuild and to attract the kind of atmosphere that will ensure that it thrives again and promotes economic activity. So that this Bridgetown regeneration project, of which the resolution is that we vest these lands in the BTII, again, is really part of a larger project. So even as we discuss this vesting, I hope that we do so in the context that the government has a larger plan. And the government has a larger plan. We're not just saying we're going to turn the Treasury building into some apartments there, but it's not only apartments, but also as well a cultural space, restaurants as well. I also want to add, Mr. President, and I must add this, that unlike what has been very unfortunately put out in the public over the last weekend or so, the Division of Culture has actually launched since May of 2022, a design competition for a monument to be placed in Heroes Square, a monument not to an individual. Mr. President, I repeat, it is not a monument to an individual or one family, but it is a monument to celebrate the Barbadian family and commemorate the journey of the Barbados family. That design competition for a monument to be placed in Heroes Square was launched in May of 2022. This week, an exhibition goes up in the foyer of the Division of Culture, highlighting the submissions, the over 10 submissions that were received. And by next week, we will be announcing the 3 top winners of that exhibition. And I'm making that point to say again, that this is all part of that project in order to build out Bridgetown. So that, just imagine, Mr. President, that within the coming year, 2.5 years, we'll be able to see right in the middle a monument that represents Barbados, that represents us, that represents the Barbadian family. Mr. President, I also want to take the opportunity, because I feel I must, Mr. President, to ask those in this country that are intent on creating hysteria, public mischief through fake news, that they ought really to reflect, that they ought really to desist. And I certainly would like to ask the Democratic Labour Party to join with us in denouncing such tactics, because it cannot be part of the political landscape that the DLP is saying to us should be showing new politics, should be showing a different kind of politics. And therefore, we believe that we are hoping that the Democratic Labour Party will be able to come out and say very strongly and loudly that it is not in support of such tactics, the spreading of fake news, particularly when they are using people's names, attempting to smear the Prime Minister and her family, and calling into question how the Division of Youth Affairs is undertaking a project in as transparent a manner as we have been doing. It is sheer political mischief, Mr. President, and we are denouncing it. Mr. President, in the context of, again, looking at the Bridgetown rejuvenation, a project is also underway to have the National Cultural Foundation relocate to Queen's Park, transforming Queen's Park as part of the wider project to create a cultural hub within this space. So you will have the National Cultural Foundation located at Queen's Park, but along with the National Cultural Foundation in its offices, we will have spaces for artists in residence. We will create a permanent space for our steel orchestras. We will have dance studios and productions. Imagine walking through Queen's Park and engaging as artists are painting and performing. That is the vision that this government has when we talk about Bridgetown and rejuvenating Bridgetown. And I'm hoping that as I say so, that we are getting the sense as well that when we talk about spaces for culture, people performing, we're talking about people. We're talking about people. We're not talking about building edifices just for so, but we're talking about creating spaces, one, that entrepreneurs can have opportunities to secure their trade, but also as well, so that Barbadians, we talked about, Mr. President, earlier, taking care of the social and the mental as well, and creating a Bridgetown that is more open. Again, not just about the shopping, not just about that level of economic activity, but a full experience, a full cultural and social experience, highlighting the fundamental culture and heritage of this country for all. I want to remind Mr. President as well that if you can imagine that picture I painted of walking to Queen's Park, when you, on your way to Queen's Park, you're also going to pass the green space that was created just in front of the central bank. You're also, Mr. President, as you traverse the Bridgetown area, going to be reminded that the government invested extremely heavily as well, Mr. President, in Golden Square Freedom Park. Again, creating a space for families and people. I do not know how many of you use Golden Square, have visited Golden Square. If you go there during the day at 6 o'clock, at 5 o'clock, on weekends, there are people sitting, playing dominoes, gathering, talking. Families are there on Sundays with kids, just having picnics and talking. Young people are there roller skating, doing all sorts of activities, and this is within the context of the city center. That is what we are talking about when we talk about rejuvenation of the city center. Mr. President, I can also speak to you as well about the tourism projects that are planned, the building of the Hyatt Hotel, the fact that we are going to build out right from Pierhead right down to Kensington, again with restaurants and open spaces. That is all part of the project in which the Treasury building is a critical part of. And importantly, within that context, Mr. President, we are then hoping that that level of economic activity will then revitalize the businesses that are already existing in Bridgetown, bring back the business and people that has probably left Bridgetown to go other way. Because now that they can feel it, they can come to Bridgetown and have an entire experience in the context of the city center. And the creation of living spaces as well creates, as I said before, what the Harvard report said. In order for city centers to thrive, they need people and lots of them. Mr. President, I do not beg that this bill be read, that this resolution be read a first time. That this resolution be now passed.
The speakers. Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to support this resolution, and I just want to make a few points where this is concerned. If you look around the world, wherever we travel, and this should be easy for persons in this room and outside of this room to understand. Oftentimes, if you talk about England, we're going to speak about London. If we talk about USA, we're going to talk about the Big Apple, New York. If we talk about Japan, we're going to single in or zero in on Tokyo. It is important for any country, regardless of size, that it has a vibrant city. This is where commerce happens. This is where culture happens. This is where people socialize. This is where business deals are made. And in all of these things, just as outlined by Senator Monroe Knight, the effort to get people to live in the city is important. Because we have seen, for those of us who have been traversing this Bridgetown for many, many years, we have seen number of restaurants, number of nightclubs, all of these things that helped to make Bridgetown what it was in the past, very active all during the day and all during the night. A lot of these things have passed away. For those of us who, when we were young, would go out and think there were lots of activities in the city. This was the place to come. And as we seek again to build it out, let us also bear in mind that this city, Bridgetown, it might be painful for some people to face the reality, but this city was part and parcel of the center of commerce for the British Empire. From slavery right up until the end of, well, the days of King Sugar. This Bridgetown was important. It sent rum, it sent all kind of things to the colonies, to the Carolinas. The wealth that was created within this city helped to fund wars within the Caribbean region. And you know, it bothers me. And you know, a lot of people might get upset why you are saying no, but I can say it bothers me when we move from old colonial days and all of these other things that we speak passionately about. And then when we have it in our own hands, it comes to this. Bridgetown is dead. And the efforts that have to be put into revitalizing it now, to get it back to its glory days, so to speak, it's going to be a monumental one. And it's going to take the support of, in my mind, a lot of our younger people, those who are going to be leaving university and looking for jobs and looking for somewhere to live. And these are going to be the ones, along with persons from outside of this country, who may want to move to a place like Barbados to live. These are the persons that we're going to be seriously targeting in order to build out the city as it should be. You ask yourself, well, who's going to support the nightlife? The nighttime economy, as we call it, it's going to be young people. It's certainly not going to be people in my age group or above, as we did when we were young. So whatever we do as we build this out, talk about the culture, we talk about restaurants, we talk about the businesses and all these other things, but the emphasis really, in my mind, has to be on providing that space, jobs also for younger people, because they're the ones who are going to drive it. They're the ones who are going to drive the growth of the city. And so I just wanted to make that small contribution, because as I said before, this is important, and like most other things, it is a work in progress, but I believe in the right direction. Housing in itself is going to be very important as to how we build it out and bring that life back to the city. And again, from the business standpoint, a lot of our young people, they're going to need the supporting agencies that we have on island, the different funds, fund access and growth enterprise for all these kind of things, are going to have to be accessible and easily accessible for those young persons who may want to start businesses and come bring back businesses to the city. And then financial institutions are going to have to be flexible in terms of helping people who need mortgages and the other things to purchase the properties, the condos, the apartments, the housing, whatever it is that is built out. So this effort is one that requires many facets of this society to be on board with it and to basically understand the importance of having a very vibrant city in Barbados. And with those very few words, I'm obliged to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator King. Senator Paris.
Mr. President, I rise to support the resolution before this honorable chamber, which is seeking to vest the property of a parcel of land to the BTII, the building we all know as the Treasury Building. As I support this resolution, I would like to commend the board and staff of the BTII for the outstanding work it is doing in the transformation of the city. We have seen the work done by the BTII in its effort to transform Bridgetown in areas like Halls Road, Constitution River, Fairchild Street, where we have the beautifully built kiosks for the vendors, and the Golden Square Freedom Park. Mr. President, when this resolution was debated in another place a couple weeks ago, I heard a few familiar voices on the calling program the same voices we hear every day. I heard them making mockery of this bill, of this resolution, saying that why the project should not be done. We'll have people in the city with clothes on, we can see clothes on the line, and all of those negative comments. Mr. President, I remember clearly that these same familiar voices were the ones who were opposing the demolition of the NIS building. They said that I don't know, I said callers, I never said moderators, and I don't listen to sides. They were against the demolition of the National Insurance Building, saying that we are demolishing a building, being a build back nothing there, and they went down the road. And how it was a waste of money. But Mr. President, I know, like me, you have visited the Golden Square Freedom Park. And it is an investment that has not only beautified the city, but it has brought life to the city. We always hear after 5 o'clock, we don't have any activity in the city. But the Golden Square Freedom Park has brought life to the city from Sunday to Sunday. You just have to drive through Golden Square, drive through Bridgetown, around Golden Square, any evening, especially on a Saturday and Sunday. And you would see families there. You see parents with their children, picnic baskets and the likes. And the parents are showing the children, trying to find the family names on the wall. I think this is something that if persons have not experienced, have not done with their children, they should do it. Because they are exposing the children to some history, which brings an awareness to where we were, where we came from, and where we are now. It exposes them to history. Mr. President, the renovations to the building, the old Treasury building and the vesting of this land would include shopping and restaurant facilities. Not only would this residential development bring life to the city, it would create job opportunities as well. While at the same time, providing families with income, they would also have 2-bedroom apartments and will be a part of the development which would assist with the much needed housing that we need in this country. Mr. President, I heard one caller saying I spoke about how unsightly it is going to be. We have persons living in apartments outside of Barbados in the city. And we go to these countries and we admire the life in the city centers, but for them, this is too good for our Barbados. So I am looking forward to the development of this city. We heard the same voices and the same noise when the vendors had to relocate from the Fairchild Street market. We heard things like, they were there for so many years and the government is now displacing them and stopping them from plying their trade. Mr. President, that project was designed to make these vendors more comfortable while at the same time making the facilities pleasing to the eye. Those unsightly structures are now a thing of the past, and we have the beautifully designed, spacious kiosks which have transformed this area. Mr. President, I was so pleased to hear some of the vendors who have located these kiosks, and they did not do it behind a shadow. They came out and identified themselves. They gave their names, so they were not doing it in the dark. They were not afraid of anything. They were saying how happy they are for what was done for them. They are comfortable and have more space to accommodate their customers, and that their businesses have seen an increase in sales. Mr. President, this is the work of a caring Labour Party government. Mr. President, I would like to encourage you, other honourable members of this chamber, to pass on a Friday or a Saturday outside the Fairchild Street Market and see the hive of activity in this area as persons relax while patronizing the vendors. Not only are persons happy to be on the outside, but these vendors who suffered as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic are happy for these improvements, which brought them more business and more customers for them. The government, once again, has proved that these familiar voices, these few familiar voices to the call-in program who objected to these two projects, wrong. And we would again do so when this residential development is completed in the city. Mr. President, I am looking forward to yet another project being undertaken by the BTII that would again enhance the city of Bridgetown. And I'm speaking of the Constitution River Phase 3. This project will see vending being done from the Constitution River back to the Globe roundabout. Again, this is going to provide employment, more employment opportunities. Mr. President, the renovations to this building and the one at Spikestown are all part of the national development, which is aimed at bringing this country into the 21st century. We need to come forward, not keep going back. In closing, Mr. President, I would like to encourage Barbadians to appreciate the efforts being done by this government to enhance the city and urge them to treat these premises as they would treat their own premises because they belong to them. They are taxpayers, and the money is used when they pay taxes to do these renovations and to make the city come alive. And Mr. President, with those few words, I once again pledge my support to this resolution. I'm obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator Paris. Further speaker is Senator Dr. Hines.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. President. I, too, think that this is a laudable initiative. I don't like that Bridgetown pretty much closes at 5 o'clock. There's not a lot to do. I mean, I come into Bridgetown at night mostly to go to Baxter's Road, so there are some things to do. There's food there. The vendors are still doing a pretty good trade, at least when they go there on a Friday or a Saturday. But outside of that, it really is quite disappointing that such a historic city lacks a lot of activity. We even see a lot of the commercial activity moving out of the city and going to other places. All of the malls and so on that are being established around the country. Warrens is like another Bridgetown kind of now, although not so much focus on pedestrians and the buses, but more for persons with cars. Sheraton Center, we know there's another mall that's being built in wieldy, and this is a historic city. I've done the historic walking tour, and there's so much to learn about this city. So much really interesting history about the careenage, economic activities that we no longer have. That this was a place where where ships were brought to be cleaned and taken care of. This is a critical part of our history in Barbados, and to revitalize this city is absolutely important. It really is. And I look forward to initiatives that bring life back to the city. I'm really glad that people listen to the call-in programs. Keep listening. I am one of the people that certainly loves that Freedom Park. I think this was one of the best things I've seen done in the city because it brings a certain type of activity to the area. People come for leisure, for recreation, to bring their families. Those who are Barbadians from the diaspora, they like to go and look on that wall to see if they can find their names. And some people are so irritated if they're looking and they cannot find their name. This is how meaningful this wall has become. And I think it is a wonderful initiative. I've listened to the discussion about bringing people to live in Bridgetown, which I found a little bit surprising because there are 6,492 registered electors in the city of Bridgetown. People live here already. And I think in this discussion, and this is really why I wanted to stand up and speak, in this discussion, we have to also be cognizant of the persons that already live in the city of Bridgetown. And we have to be very aware that the areas in which persons in Bridgetown live are not high-income areas. We are talking about people who live in very modest households and areas. And it is important in cities to have people, as Senator Monroe Knight said. It really is important to have a lot of people. But we have to be cognizant of the social dynamics as well as while we bring people into the city. 6,492 registered electors. So those are persons who are 18 and older. There are more people than that. There are those who are younger. We know there's some issues with the electoral list. So, maybe some persons are there that shouldn't be there. They're living overseas, but they still want to be on the list or what have you. But we can say that there are maybe around 7,000 people that are already living in the city. We need to have different types of activities for persons to engage in. So Freedom Park is a different type of activity beyond going shopping and beyond eating. We have to, and when we are constructing developments and so on, we need to think about mixed uses. So we want to have different types of activities when we build things like whatever this residential complex will be. But we have to be careful of gentrification. Why do we need to be careful of gentrification? All right, so gentrification, bringing persons from higher income brackets with particular expectations and putting them in particular areas has its benefits. And we've heard of some of the benefits today. Some of these benefits include increasing investment, increasing consumption and economic activity. These are the persons that we are expecting to go to the restaurants, to demand things like nightclubs, which we used to have. I used to go to some nightclubs in the city. I mean, that's kind of aging myself, but anyway. But we used to have these things in the city. There probably still are some nightclubs, maybe not as big and popular as the Warehouse or Le Mirage. But anyway, I digress. The point I'm really making here is that these persons are going to drive certain types of activities that we want to bring into the city so that after 5 o'clock we see activity, so that you're not just going to Sheraton or to wherever the other malls are, the Dome Mall and Sky Mall and all the rest of them. People, when they get home on the evening and they're living here in the city and they want to go shopping, can just get up and go to the stores around that are open. They can go to the eateries that are open and so on. So these are some of the good things that we can see from this kind of development. But there's some other pitfalls that we really have to ensure that we avoid because there are already people living here who are not necessarily fitting into that kind of income bracket that I believe we are targeting in this new development. Gentrification can reduce social capital. It can do this by causing some tensions between established communities and the new communities that we are implanting or inserting in the area. They can increase property prices. So as the area becomes better looking with better facilities and so on, it may become increasingly attractive. I believe this is the hope too, to other people to do these kinds of developments in the city, to take some of the buildings that are looking kind of musty and revitalize them and do other sorts of developments, bring some people into the city. But in doing that, this increases things like property prices. And in increasing property prices, it can cause some issues for persons who are already living in the area. It can cause some benefits for them too. They can sell some of the homes in the area and make a sweet penny and move elsewhere. But for others, this can be problematic. There can be pressures on people to sell their homes and to move. There can be pressures as well on some of the commercial entities in the city as we see gentrification, because people may be demanding certain types of stores and eateries. So this can also change the character of the city. And change is not bad, but we have to think about these social dynamics when we consider the change. I also want to say that surveillance and policing, this is one of the things that in many parts of the world, people note who come from the established communities. So we know there are some issues already across this country, all across this country, with crime, with violence, all sorts of things. So I'm not saying that because persons live in the city, there's something special about crime in the city. Because just yesterday on the news, I heard about a stalker being caught in Claremont. So we have these things happening all over. But what we see when there is gentrification is that the persons who are more affluent, who move in, they require a certain level of security. And they may view those from certain areas that are lower income as kind of threats and in need of being watched. And I visited a part of the United States of America, and I was taken around by a colleague there to some of the historically Black colleges and universities. And this was one of the stories that she was telling me about certain areas that experienced gentrification. It was really beautiful to see the development, but some of the stories were very unfortunate, where there are a lot of police patrols of particular areas because there is a view that these poor people are criminals. So we have this over surveillance of persons because they come from low-income areas. And we already may have some of this because there is the view that this is where the gangs are located. This is where the rude boys are. The boys on the block are up to no good. The girls that are home doing whatever probably are doing things that are no good. And when we add this dynamic to the city, we can then do some things that are not conducive to the development of social capital. Rather than building community, we can build some antagonisms. So I want that we are very careful and cautious when we do this sort of thing. Not just to think about the benefits in terms of how Bridgetown will look and feel. It will look like a lovely, modern, developed city that will also have to take care to preserve its heritage because this is a World Heritage Site. But I also want us to think very, very carefully about how we do this so that those almost 7,000 people already living in the city are not displaced, they're not harmed, they're not criminalized because they're viewed as some troublesome poor people. I want us to take care in doing this. I would hope that in addition to the other kinds of assessments that we always have to do, environmental impact assessment, for instance, there's social impact assessment, that persons that live in the city already, businesses already established in the city are not just brought along, are included so that they not only understand how this is supposed to work, but they have an input. And they're not pushed to the margins in any development. And this is a really serious concern. This is already an island that focuses on tourism. And we have this dynamic already present. When we have people that look different, dress different, we can tell that they are coming with money and some of the antagonisms that this can cause in our societies. If it is that this development is not just to attract locals who can afford to live in the city, but persons coming from other parts of the world, I think a lot of care has to be taken to ensure that when we do this in a way that is productive for all of the persons who are already resident in the city of Bridgetown, to the existing businesses, and also for the wider society. We don't want Bridgetown to become a place that people don't come to because, it's not that they're not coming because there's nothing to do in Bridgetown, but they're not coming because it's some kind of bougie area that only certain people are supposed to go into. So we want to create this in a way that is really beneficial for the entire society. And with these words, Mr. President, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you, Senator Dr. Hines. And the speakers, Senator Dr. Monroe-Knight.
Mr. President, let me thank those that contributed to the debate on this resolution, and in particular, Senator the Honourable Dr. Christina Hines for her discussion on gentrification and the impact of that. Certainly, this government is taking a phased approach. There are those that would criticize this as we're taking too long. But it is for those very same reasons, the need to make sure that we're not going to be perfect, but that we, as much as possible, try to get it right and do things in a phased approach. And not only focus, as I said before, on the buildings and so on, but make sure that we are including social spaces, make sure that we are taking care of the various communities and listening to the various communities and ensuring that in the context of building out Bridgetown as a thriving city centre, that all can be able to participate equally within that context. I also want to say again, as I think I say quite often, the government is taking a full and comprehensive approach in the way that it works. So again, when we have these separate debates and discussions, they can look distinct, but they should not be separated from the overall way that the government is taking and treating to social policy. So that I know that, for instance, that the residents of the city of Bridgetown were exposed to a financial literacy workshop over the weekend, held by the Financial Literacy Bureau under the Ministry of Energy. And that was directly for average citizens. We didn't identify who, not brown, whatever, to be able to come out and to be able to understand opportunities that could be available, how to invest, where to get information from, and all of those things as well. We're also adding that as well to government's effort to improve the housing stock in city areas, to improve the infrastructure within the city areas for the existing residents. For the existing residents. So, Mr. President, I'm emphasizing that I take on board the discussion about the possible impacts. We are attending to that, but also as well that we are hoping that we have a discussion which appreciates that this particular resolution sits within the context of a wider policy landscape for the government in terms of how it is rolling out its social policy as well. Finally, Mr. President, I just wanted to reflect on the discussion around the creation of employment opportunities, which are also going to be extremely beneficial to those residents that already exist. So that, yes, while we bring people into the area that have money, that are able to invest, again, like I said, the building out of Queen's Park, the creation of restaurants, the creation of other spaces, we talked about kiosks and those sorts of things, are opportunities that will be afforded to residents within the area. And through, again, building their capacities in several interventions that are being done by the representatives for those constituencies to ensure that they can encourage their citizens to be able to actively participate and also take a hold of the benefits. I also, Mr. President, don't feel I can close this discussion unless I recognize the renaming of the Fairchild Street bus terminal, which happened a couple of weekends ago, in the name of Archbishop Granville Williams, and to say as well that this is also another attempt by the government through the Division of Culture to ensure again that in the city centre that we have reflections of ourselves, reflections of our communities, our families, etc. And the renaming of that, therefore, comes into this discussion in a big way because in the context of the city centre, your child, my child, our cousin, grannies can now look up at the Fairchild Street bus terminal and be able to identify with that name of the Archbishop Granville Williams, taking pride of place in the context of the city of Bridgetown. And I want, Mr. President, to indicate that we are intending to do that more as a deliberate policy to ensure that right throughout this country, that we can have spaces that are reflective of Barbadians. The Division of Culture is, we've just started a committee that will be looking at the naming of several parks, again, historically, several spaces, to look and see what is the historical connection, again, with Barbadians, and be able to inscribe them again, so that, again, we, as a new republic, can ensure that we have a country that is reflective of its people. Mr. President, I do now beg that this resolution be now passed.
The question is that this resolution do not pass. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. If the ayes have it, this resolution is now passed.
Order number 5, in the name of the Honourable Acting Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to prove in accordance with Section 3 of the Crown Lands Vesting and Disposal Act, Chapter 225, the vesting in the National Housing Corporation of a parcel of land, the property of the state, situate at Bridgetown in the parcel, situate at Brighton in the parcel of St. George in this island for housing development. Beg your pardon.
Senator Dr. Monroe Knight.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this resolution before us is really reflective of an ongoing move by the government to honour its commitment to the citizens of Barbados in undertaking the silent housing revolution. Mr. President, I want to speak to this notion of the silent housing revolution again as something that is fundamental and as a fundamental principle. I am extremely passionate, Mr. President, and you would hear me speak and be reflective of that passion when I speak on issues of education and training, because I believe fundamentally that education and training are critical pillars and the underpinning of being able to move people from a situation of poverty to one of empowerment. Similarly, in the context of housing and having adequate housing, I'm equally passionate about that. And I'm equally passionate about that, Mr. President, because being appreciative of our history, being appreciative of the fact that we have a history in which, in the context of colonialism and the post-emancipation period, that we had such dire housing conditions in this country, that we had situations and perhaps still have situations in which people are forced to live in some conditions that are really not acceptable, large households being forced because of economic realities to be able to live in small quarters. The government can't take responsibility for everything on its own in a short space of time, but certainly tackling the question of the provision of affordable and safe housing, particularly for low-income people, is one of the principal actions of this government, designed to make sure that we pull everybody along on this journey of development. Because if you can give people affordable housing when the Bajan gets to turn the key and step into its house and his or her house and be comfortable, Mr. President, that is empowerment. That is pride in who you are as a person. And so that this silent revolution that this government has embarked on in order to be able to provide housing, the silent revolution says that we will provide 10,000 houses, as indicated in our manifesto, is one that this government is dedicated principally to be able to deliver, Mr. President. I also want to say that even in the context of delivering on that promise, we all can appreciate that, one, we have constrained resources, both financial and both in the context of manpower, to then to be able to deliver as quickly as perhaps the society needs. We have, Mr. President, as we discussed before, some operational challenges that we have to be able to work out. But this government, as I always say, is about facing it and fixing it. And in that context, the Ministry of Housing, Lands and Maintenance has been challenged in the context of their Commitment for Results framework, which is the government's overarching framework to be able to monitor the performance of ministries and agencies, has been challenged to ensure that it can provide metrics and indicators on its delivery of housing solutions so that they can remain accountable for that level of delivery, Mr. President, to the people of Barbados. I also want to say that the provision of safe and affordable housing is also part of government's overall commitment to delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals. While it is not a specific goal, we recognize that it is very much tied to delivery of reduction in poverty and inequality as well. Mr. President, in another discussion, we talked about the fact that if we are not careful, we can establish systems and processes, even unintentionally, that can create inequalities. And in this country, we have a level of inequality in the context of access to affordable housing. There are those of us who can, through our own means, obtain mortgages, be able to build on our own. But the government, in the context of the revolution that it is attempting to deliver, is saying that it is not intending to leave those who can least afford it behind. It is saying that it is committed to ensuring that we will create an opportunity for those that are in the lower income brackets to have housing, Mr. President, that is not just housing, but good housing as well. That is important. Because before, if we look at our housing policy, and if we talk about Bajan colloquialism, we know the thing of the scheme houses, yeah? Of people living in apartments that they're so small, they're not able to have all of their things in. There's no facility for parks, there's no facility for people to hang their clothes and all of those things. The provision of this housing that we will be providing in the context of this revolution, is attempting to be responsive to those things. Is attempting to be able to ensure that we can reflect the Bajan tradition of having a space as much as we can in the context of the human resources that allows the individual to feel valued, and that we're not just attempting, because they may be on the lower socioeconomic rung, to push them into spaces that will not add value to their lives and their personal esteem. Mr. President, the literature would also suggest that housing is a platform for household resilience and sustainability as well. Housing is a platform for household resilience and sustainability. Housing is juxtaposed to homelessness. Housing is also juxtaposed to, you can have housing, but it can be inadequate. It can be unsafe. So that if you provide people with safe and adequate housing, then we are building resilience and sustainability, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to also indicate that, as I indicated before, the government has placed this revolution as part of our priorities. For this year, the government and the Prime Minister in her budget speech, and as it was indicated in the President's speech, has set itself a target of delivering 12,000 houses this year. The Ministry of Housing and Lands and Maintenance is reporting that it is on track to exceed the delivery of that amount for this year and also as well for next year. And it is doing so in the context of public and private partnerships. And again, Mr. President, that is a conversation, because the government has been criticized in some quarters for its delivery, but we have recognized that the government on its own with its resources cannot always be the one solely going out there to be able to deliver the housing solutions for people, and therefore is engaging in the necessary partnerships in order to be able to deliver this housing that we want to make sure is accessible for all. Mr. President, the Ministry of Housing and Lands, as I indicated before, will exceed that target. And this will exceed that target, Mr. President, with some 1,428 houses expected to be available to citizens during the current year, and with approximately 6,000 more houses being targeted during year 2. The government is delivering on its promises. But as we seek to do so, we recognize, and I believe that if we are all truthful and honest with ourselves, is that there are resource constraints even in relation to land. So you would see that the government is moving to vest available lands in order to ensure that it can deliver on its housing promise. And the vesting in these lands allows the government then to be able to deliver in areas where there is the greatest need. I also want to remind Mr. President, this honourable chamber, that over the last month, the Ministry of Housing has been engaging in a wide program. I believe that there was a fair, a mortgage fair, that was held in Golden Square, Freedom Park. I think it was last month or so, allowing people to be able to come and sign up, get information in relation to access to housing, to be able to understand the process. And again, Mr. President, I will not stand here before you and say that it is all perfect, that we have been able to deliver at the pace of the demand of the society. We haven't been able to. The demand is extremely high, but the Ministry of Housing and Land is working, first of all, to look at the backlog that it has on the one hand. So it's doing multiple things, not one and then the other. It is working to look at the backlog and to be able to clear that backlog. And even as it does so, then be able to offer housing solutions, but also in the context of those that are currently in housing operated through the NHC to ensure that repairs are carried out and that there is a program as well moving from rent to own. So multiple planks and multiple pillars, Mr. President, in the context of this silent housing revolution. Mr. President, I also, as I close, want to indicate as well that the focus, again, of this housing policy as it is on low-income brackets, and also as well, even what you would call perhaps a middle-income bracket, whether they be teachers or those in other, in other areas of employment, that unfortunately might not be able to easily access mortgages and loans from traditional private sector. It's that, again, the government understands that the environment that we have within the country, if we are not careful, can set up a system in which those who have the capacity will be able to run ahead, and those who have not quite enough capacity can be left somewhere in the middle without any recourse. And the government is also seeking to close that gap through its initiative in the context of hope, again, with the provision of housing and also financing for these homeowners. Mr. President, I do now beg that this resolution be read, be now passed.
Thank you, Senator Dr. Monroe. Any other speakers? The question is that this resolution do not pass. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The things the ayes have it. This resolution is now passed.
Mr. President, I do now move to beg that this session be adjourned sine die.
The question is that this sitting be now adjourned sine die. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The things the ayes have it. This sitting stands adjourned sine die.